In this emotional journey, Phil Jenkins takes you through the heart-wrenching discovery of his wife Megan's potential betrayal. When he unexpectedly shows up at her conference in Baltimore, he uncovers more than he bargained for. What happens when suspicion turns into shocking revelations? Phil Jenkins had always prided himself on being a logical man. A corporate lawyer at 35, he knew how to evaluate situations, weigh risks, and make decisions based on evidence. But lately, the evidence wasn't making sense. Something was wrong in his marriage. He couldn't put his finger on it until now. His wife, Megan, had always been a successful marketing executive, a woman of ambition and charm. But over the past few months, things had changed between them. She'd become distant. The late-night calls were no longer from work colleagues, but from a mystery that Phil couldn't quite unravel. She was always busy, distracted, avoiding eye contact, and when she did talk, it was in a way that felt rehearsed, too careful. Phil wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but there was a gut feeling gnawing at him. He had seen the signs, small ones, sure, but unsettling all the same. An unexplained message on her phone, a shift in the way she spoke about her work trips. And then there was the way she'd pull away when he reached out. The touch that once felt intimate now felt like a cold, distant formality. Phil knew something wasn't right, and that feeling grew more and more every day. His thoughts would race when she was out of the room, wondering if she was somewhere else with someone else. He tried to dismiss it, tried to push it to the back of his mind. But every time he looked at her, that nagging feeling returned, stronger and more insistent. One night, after another sleepless evening, Phil made a decision that would change everything. He would take action. No more waiting, no more guessing. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of uncertainty. He decided he was going to Baltimore, to the conference where Megan was attending, and find out the truth. He didn't know what he'd find, but he knew he had to confront this head-on. The plan was simple, and yet the consequences of it were unimaginable. He could no longer just be the husband who trusted blindly. His heart ached at the thought, but Phil couldn't sit idly by any longer. If his wife was lying, he needed to know. If she was betraying him, he would have to face it no matter what it cost. The next few days passed in a blur as Phil prepared for his trip. He couldn't focus at work. His thoughts kept returning to Megan, to the changes he'd seen in her, and the overwhelming feeling that she was hiding something. He had to know the truth. It was the only way he could move forward. He called Freddie, his longtime friend and confidant. Freddie had seen it all: breakups, affairs, relationships torn apart. Phil knew that if anyone could offer advice, it would be him. After explaining the situation, Freddie listened carefully before speaking. "Man, you've got to figure this out. You can't let this eat you alive." He paused, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "If she's cheating, you need to know. But if you confront her, be prepared. It's not going to be easy." Phil absorbed the advice, but deep down, he knew there was no turning back. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. He was losing sleep, losing trust, and most of all, losing himself in this dark cloud of doubt. He couldn't walk around with this gut-wrenching feeling in his stomach anymore. That night, he booked his flight to Baltimore. He wasn't sure what he'd find when he arrived, but the plan was simple: to catch Megan in the act or clear the air. Either way, the truth would come to light, one way or another. As he stared at the flight confirmation email, Phil's mind raced. Could he really handle the truth? What would happen if he found out she had been cheating? And if he didn't find anything, how would he ever trust her again? With a heavy sigh, he packed his bag. Whatever happened next, Phil knew he had to confront his fears. The time for speculation was over. It was time to get answers, no matter the cost. Phil's heart pounded as his taxi pulled up to the sleek, modern hotel in Baltimore. The city loomed in front of him, a vast expanse of towering buildings and bright lights, but it was the hotel that dominated his thoughts. This was where Megan was staying for her conference, and this was where everything he had feared would either be confirmed or shattered. He had spent hours imagining this moment, but now that it was here, his emotions were a whirlwind of dread, uncertainty, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The lobby was filled with guests, laughter, and the clink of glasses, but Phil barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the front desk, where the receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. He had no idea how to act, how to look. Was he being too obvious? Did she sense something was wrong? He forced a smile as he asked for Megan Jenkins' room number. The receptionist didn't hesitate, handing him a key card with a bright, "Enjoy your stay, sir." Phil's stomach twisted as he walked toward the elevator, the key card burning a hole in his pocket. What would he find when he opened the door to room 214? Would Megan be there alone, or would he walk in on her with someone else? His mind played through a dozen scenarios, each more painful than the last. But he couldn't turn back now. When the elevator doors opened to the second floor, Phil's pulse quickened. He walked slowly, each step echoing in his mind like a countdown. He stood in front of the door, key card in hand, and with a deep breath, he slid it into the lock. The door clicked open. Phil stepped inside, heart in his throat. The room was dimly lit, and there was Megan sitting at a desk, her back to him, typing away on her laptop. There were no signs of another person, no heated exchanges, no secret meetings. Just Megan, working late, looking as ordinary as ever. Phil's heart sank. This wasn't what he had imagined. Was this it? Was his suspicion unfounded? The silence between them was deafening. For a moment, Phil just stood there, unable to speak, his mind a jumble of confusion and disbelief. Megan didn't even turn around at first, too absorbed in her work. But when she finally did, her face was a mask of surprise. "Phil, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of anxiety. Phil couldn't form the words. His suspicion had led him here, but now, seeing her sitting in front of him, everything felt off. He had prepared for a confrontation, for the truth to come crashing down, but this felt like a cruel twist of fate. He had expected a betrayal, but what he saw was a woman completely absorbed in her work. Still, that gnawing feeling remained. Something was not right, and Phil couldn't shake the thought that maybe it wasn't over yet. That night, after a tense dinner and an awkward silence hanging over their conversation, Phil couldn't push away the gnawing suspicion in his gut. Megan had gone to the bathroom to freshen up, leaving Phil alone in the hotel room. His mind raced. Was he imagining things, or was there something more going on here? He couldn't get past the way she had looked at him earlier, almost too calmly, as if she knew something he didn't. The sudden urge to investigate consumed him. Phil stood up from the chair, his steps quiet but quick. As he glanced toward the bathroom, Megan's voice drifted out, telling him she'd be just a minute. It was now or never. He had to know. With a deep breath, he approached her toiletry bag, carefully placed on the vanity counter. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to stop, to just let it go, but he couldn't. He opened the zipper slowly, his hands trembling. Inside, there were all the usual items: a toothbrush, face cream, a hairbrush. But then something caught his eye, a small compartment slightly open. Without thinking, he slid his fingers inside. His heart dropped as he pulled out a small pack of condoms, too, neatly tucked away, as if they had always belonged there. Phil froze. His stomach twisted in knots. The evidence was right there in front of him. The image of the condoms, innocuous yet devastating, confirmed what he had been afraid of all along. Megan wasn't just distant, she was hiding something from him. But who? And when? His breath came in short bursts as his mind raced. He hadn't expected to find anything this concrete. This wasn't some vague feeling anymore, it was real, undeniable proof. His emotions swirled between rage, hurt, and disbelief. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't he noticed? How could Megan have been so careless? Phil knew he couldn't confront her immediately. He needed more time to process this, to figure out what his next move would be. But one thing was clear: his world had just shattered, and the woman he thought he knew so well had just become a stranger in his eyes. As he stood there, holding the small packet in his hand, Phil could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him. He was at a crossroads now, with the truth in his hand. Would he confront Megan tonight, or would he wait for the right moment? There was no turning back, no way to unsee what he had found. Phil paced the hotel room, his mind whirling with conflicting emotions. The condoms were still in his hand, their presence haunting him as he tried to process what he had discovered. The physical evidence of Megan's betrayal was undeniable, yet something deep within him hesitated. Was it really betrayal? Was this all some sort of misunderstanding? He wanted to believe that there was an explanation, a reason, anything that could make sense of this mess. But deep down, he knew. The piece of the puzzle he had been chasing for months had finally clicked into place. His suspicions had never been just paranoia, they were based on something real. Something was wrong. And yet, as he stood there, holding the evidence, Phil found himself caught in a web of doubt. He couldn't just confront Megan without thinking things through. What would he say? How would he react if she denied everything? What if it wasn't her fault? His head was a storm of questions and fears, each more suffocating than the last. How could he go back to the man he was before, the trusting husband who believed in the sanctity of their marriage, when now everything felt like a lie? The guilt weighed heavily on him. Was it right to confront her this way, without a clear picture of what had really been going on? Would it make things worse? Was it his pride, his own ego, that was pushing him to act before understanding the full truth? As the minutes passed, the internal conflict inside him grew louder. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to call her out, to confront her directly and demand the truth. But there was also a nagging voice telling him to wait, to gather more information, to look at the situation from every angle before making a rash decision. He had always prided himself on being calm, collected, and rational, but now he felt more lost than ever. Phil dropped onto the bed, exhausted by the turmoil in his mind. He knew he couldn't leave the hotel without answers. But was he ready for what he might hear? Was he prepared for the truth, no matter how ugly it might be? Or would it destroy him forever? As the night wore on, Phil's restlessness grew. The uncertainty was eating at him. He needed someone to talk to, someone who could help him make sense of everything. There was only one person he could turn to: Freddie. The man had been his best friend for years, always there to offer blunt advice, even when it wasn't what Phil wanted to hear. Phil sat at the edge of the bed, dialing Freddie's number with shaking hands. The phone rang a few times before Freddie picked up, his voice low but familiar. "Hey man, what's going on?" "Freddie, I need you." Phil's voice cracked and he cursed under his breath. He was a man who prided himself on control, but now, with everything unraveling around him, he couldn't hide his desperation. "Whoa, slow down," Freddie said. "What's happening?" Phil quickly recounted the events of the day: the hotel, the unexpected visit to Megan's room, the work she was doing, and most importantly, the condoms. As he spoke, his chest tightened with every word. It felt like reliving the moment all over again, like he was sinking deeper into an abyss. Freddie listened quietly, and when Phil finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Freddie spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Okay, Phil, you've got to stay calm here. I know you're hurt, but you need to think about this carefully. What are you planning to do?" Phil let out a long breath, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I found them, her condoms. It's not a coincidence. She's been hiding something from me, Freddie. I don't know what to believe anymore." Freddie sighed. "You've got to confront her, man. You can't let this eat at you. But don't do it until you're sure. Make sure you've got all the facts. You can't accuse her without knowing what's really going on." Phil's mind raced. Was Freddie right? Was he jumping the gun too soon? But the evidence was right in front of him. How could he let this go without knowing the full extent of the betrayal? "Listen," Freddie continued, his voice softer now. "If you confront her tonight, be prepared for everything. She might deny it. She might even turn it around on you. But you can't just let it slide. You deserve the truth, Phil." Phil's heart hammered in his chest. He felt as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He didn't know if he was ready for the truth, but he knew that he couldn't leave this hotel without confronting Megan. He had already come this far. "Thanks, Freddie," Phil muttered, his voice shaking. "I'll figure it out." The call ended, and Phil sat in the silence, the weight of Freddie's words settling in. His next move was critical, and the stakes were higher than ever. He had to confront Megan. He couldn't back down now. But what if the truth was worse than he imagined? Phil couldn't shake the feeling of unease as he walked toward the door of Megan's room, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. After speaking to Freddie, he had no choice but to confront her. The weight of the evidence, the condoms, felt like a heavy burden he couldn't carry any longer. The truth was staring him in the face, but what would happen when he finally said it out loud? What if Megan denied everything? What if she turned it all around on him, made him feel like he was the crazy one? His hand hovered over the door handle. For a moment, he paused. His heart raced, a mixture of anxiety and dread. Could he do this? Could he handle the fallout of this conversation, no matter what the truth turned out to be? It wasn't just about the condoms anymore, it was about everything that had been building up in their marriage. The lies, the silence, the distance between them. He opened the door, stepping into the dimly lit room. Megan was still sitting at the desk, but now there was a noticeable tension in the air, something different in her posture. She turned to look at him, and for the first time, Phil noticed something in her eyes, fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Megan," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands clenched at his sides and his jaw tightened. "I need to ask you something." Megan looked up from her work, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Phil, what's going on? Why are you acting so strange?" Phil didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pulled the condoms from his pocket, his gaze never leaving her face. "I found these in your bag. What do you have to say about it?" Megan's face drained of color, and for a brief moment Phil could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. She stood up from the desk, her hands trembling. "Phil, I don't know what you're talking about." Phil's heart sank. The denial, the shock, the act, it was all too familiar. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. But it didn't make the sting any less painful. "Don't lie to me, Megan," he said, his voice growing firmer. "I'm not stupid. I know what I found." Megan's expression softened, and for a moment it looked like she was about to break. But instead, she took a step back, her hand rising to cover her mouth. "It's not what you think, Phil." Phil's pulse quickened, and he felt his control slipping away. He wanted answers. He needed the truth. "Then tell me what it is," he demanded. "What's going on? Who is he?" Megan's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't speak. The silence between them was suffocating. Phil's mind raced, but the words wouldn't come. He had spent months suspecting her, and now, here it was, the moment of truth. He was ready for a confession, ready for the truth to come pouring out, but instead, Megan's gaze fell to the floor. "Phil," she said softly, her voice shaky, "I never meant for it to happen, but I've been seeing someone. I'm so sorry." The confession hung in the air like a weight, crushing Phil's heart. He hadn't expected it to be this direct, this brutal. But now that it was out in the open, there was no turning back. Phil's world seemed to collapse in on itself as Megan's words echoed in his mind. She had been seeing someone. The trust was gone. The life he had built with her, the life they had shared, was built on lies. And now, there was nothing left but the painful truth. The minutes that followed were a blur. Megan's apology, her attempts to explain, her promises to make things right, they all felt distant, muffled in Phil's mind. The pain was too raw, too overwhelming. He had imagined this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. Megan spoke in fragmented sentences, trying to explain herself. "It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a mistake. I was lonely, Phil. I never meant for you to find out this way." Her voice broke, but Phil couldn't bring himself to comfort her. His emotions were all over the place: hurt, anger, betrayal. He couldn't even look at her without feeling like he was drowning in all of it. "How long?" Phil finally asked, his voice barely audible, a mixture of disbelief and dread. The question hung in the air, thick with tension. Megan hesitated, her eyes darting away from his. She bit her lip, clearly struggling with the answer. "A few months," she whispered, her voice barely a whisper. "Since the conference in Chicago." Phil felt the floor beneath him shift. A few months. This wasn't some brief mistake, some fleeting moment of weakness. This was an affair. A deliberate betrayal that had lasted longer than he had even suspected. The room seemed to spin as Megan continued talking, but Phil couldn't hear her anymore. His mind was too loud, filled with the sound of his own thoughts, each one more destructive than the last. How could she? How could he have been so blind? Every little piece of their life together had been tainted by this secret, this lie that had festered for so long. "I'm sorry," Megan said again, her voice breaking. But Phil couldn't respond. His chest tightened, and he could feel the tears welling up in his eyes. But he wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not now. He needed space. He needed time to think. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Megan behind. The hallway felt cold and distant as he made his way to the elevator. His mind was a storm and his heart was shattered. What now? What was left of their marriage? Could he ever forgive her? Or was this the end? The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, but the silence inside felt deafening. Phil was alone, and for the first time, he truly understood the depth of the betrayal. Phil sat in his car outside the hotel, the engine running but his mind completely still. The city of Baltimore felt distant, foreign to him now. The noise, the lights, the life outside, it all seemed like it belonged to someone else. He had just walked away from Megan, from everything he had known. But now, as the adrenaline faded and the reality of the situation sank in, all Phil could think about was one thing: what now? The pain was unbearable, but there was something else, something more profound. A decision loomed, and it was one he couldn't avoid any longer. What was he going to do with this truth, with this shattered version of his life? Could he find a way to rebuild, or was this the end of everything they had built together? For a while, he didn't know the answer. His emotions, a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and betrayal, fought for dominance in his mind. He wanted to lash out, to make her feel the pain he was feeling, but he also wanted to understand why. Why did Megan do this? What had driven her to betray him? Was he to blame for not noticing the cracks earlier? Phil's thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of his phone. He glanced down at the screen. Freddie's name flashed in bold letters, and for a moment he hesitated. He wasn't ready to talk, not yet, but Freddie had been there for him through everything. Phil knew his friend would demand an answer, would insist on talking him through this. He answered the phone. "Phil, talk to me." What happened? Freddie's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. He knew something had gone wrong. Phil let out a long sigh, his fingers gripping the steering wheel. "It's over, Freddie." She admitted it. "She's been seeing someone else. A few months now. I don't know what to do anymore." There was silence on the other end, but Phil could feel Freddie's presence, steady, unyielding. "What do you want?" Freddie asked finally. "What do you need right now?" Phil's voice cracked. "I don't know. I need to figure out what's next. Can I move on from this? Can I forgive her?" Freddie paused before responding, his voice unwavering. "I can't answer that for you. But I will tell you this: forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for her. You need to figure out what's best for you. Take some time, think things through. But don't let this define you, man. You've got a lot to live for." The words hit Phil like a shockwave. Forgiveness. Could he ever forgive her for this? Could he move past the betrayal, or would it always haunt him? "I'll figure it out," Phil said, his voice steady, but deep down he wasn't sure. After hanging up, Phil sat in the car for a long time, the weight of the situation still heavy on his shoulders. He realized that, despite everything, he had to take control of his future. Megan's actions had irrevocably changed things between them, but he was still in control of how this chapter of his life would unfold. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't going to be made overnight. But one thing was clear: Phil couldn't stay in this limbo. He had to either walk away from the marriage and start anew, or find a way to heal and rebuild. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't keep living in the shadow of the betrayal. It was time to face the next chapter of his life, no matter how difficult it was. The next few days felt like a blur. The hotel room, the confrontation, the heartbreak, everything had happened so quickly. Phil returned home to an empty apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. Megan had tried to call, sent text messages, and even left a voicemail pleading for a chance to explain. But Phil couldn't bring himself to answer. He needed space. He needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. Each night he found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in his head. He thought about all the moments they had shared, all the memories of their time together. It was hard to reconcile the woman he had loved with the one who had betrayed him. How could she have done this? How could he have missed all the signs? Phil knew he had to make a choice. He couldn't keep living in this emotional limbo. He had tried to give Megan the benefit of the doubt, to justify her actions, but deep down, he knew it was time to face reality. There was no going back from this. Finally, after days of deliberation, Phil made the difficult decision to move forward with his life. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew he couldn't stay in a relationship built on lies. He packed his things, left the apartment, and began the process of starting over. It wasn't easy. Every step felt like a battle, but slowly Phil began to rebuild. He focused on his work, his friends, and the things that brought him peace. He knew it would take time to heal, to forgive not just Megan, but himself for not seeing the truth sooner. As for Megan, she faded into the background of Phil's life. He didn't know what the future held for her, but he had to let go. He couldn't keep holding on to the past. He had to look ahead, not back. The road to healing wasn't easy, and Phil knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The pain would always be a part of him, but it wouldn't define him. He was moving forward, and that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this journey through Phil's emotional turmoil engaging and relatable. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Stay tuned for more suspenseful, emotional stories that dive deep into the complexities of relationships. See you in the next video.